things that I wanted to just touch on before we get into questions. For anybody who watches this later or is joining in, March is a great time to be taking a look at your trees and seeing what needs to be happening, for the upcoming season. The nice thing about this time of year is you can kind of inspect to see if you've had any damage that's resulted, throughout the winter. And the leaves aren't on, the deciduous trees yet, so you get a good view of everything. Keep in mind that this is the time to start getting your fruit trees pruned and elm trees. Fruit trees we like to prune in the spring, mostly to help minimize the chance of spreading disease, which can spread more easily during the growing season. And for elms, it's particularly important that we prune them in the fall to spring. So Mike's question, I saw you were wondering about a good spruce. One of the
dwarf evergreen.
One of the dwarf evergreens that I would recommend is a dwarf Norway spruce. They're really quite nice trees overall. They tend to be easy to work with, and they keep their shape relatively well from what I've seen. There's some really important notes about growing evergreens in containers, especially when trying to winterize them. They cannot withstand being outside in the winter in a pot. When the roots are in the ground in the winter, regardless of what the temperature in the air is, the ground doesn't generally get much colder than -5 to maybe -10 at the very most. And the roots have the ability to withstand that level of freezing because that's the realm they're going to live in, in nature.
Clay, they can hardly hear you.
Oh, it's quiet?
Yeah, it's really quiet. Can you move closer?
I can move closer. All right, I'll back up to containerizing. So roots need to be in the ground for the winter, and if they're not in the ground, the containers can get too cold. So if it gets to -30 outside, the roots in the container, in the pot, will get down to that level, and they will have fatal damage. Essentially, all the roots will die off, and trees rarely make it through winter in a pot like that. You can place them in the garage, or alternatively, you can dig a hole and put them in the hole for the winter to help level out the temperature.
Sorry, Clay, I might have missed that when I stepped out of the room for a moment, but did you cover which specific varieties you like for the container grown dwarf evergreens, or?
There's a lot of different varieties. You can do pretty much anything you buy at a nursery is grown in a container to start off with. If you want to keep it in the container, it's going to impact its life overall. You're not going to have as long of a lifespan out of that plant. Generally, they're always wanting to grow more roots and spread out and find more resources. So when you confine them, it does impact their overall health. So you'll get a limited lifespan, but if you're looking for something that you're going to take care of for 5 to 10 years, you can pick pretty much anything really. The important thing is just to understand what kind of growth habit you're going to get out of the plant you're buying. Most of the time, these are relatively easy to find out from your supplier. But overall, I like to pick, anything that is labeled as a dwarf variety generally has small growth. There's a lot of shrub-like evergreens that can grow a lot. Like Mugo pine's a good example. Mugo pine, you can get well over 12 inches of growth in 1 year. Even though it's a shrub, it's a large shrub. But the dwarf Mugo pine, is only going to grow a few inches per year, as a comparison. And there's a lot of nice topiaries you can get as well. If you're going to have a containerized evergreen, topiaries are a really nice option. They often will come already shaped into a nice, sort of artistic shape, and they're relatively easy to maintain at that level if you just trim it a little bit as you go.
And where do we look for these varieties, or?
Well, we're not going to have any at our garden center this year. In the future we may consider bringing in these kinds of products, but until we've got a sort of permanent establishment where we're going to be near customers, I would just say that I would look at maybe 5-Star Nursery is a really, really good option. That they're out of Alderside. They've got some nice plants. I think they're my first choice for almost anything. If they have it, I go there first. Other than that, you're looking at larger garden centers. You can go to box stores too. When you're thinking about containerized stuff, though, you don't have to get too picky about your location. A very large portion of the plants that are brought in by retailers are grown by one large company called Byland, and they grow their stuff in BC in very, very large quantities and ship it all over from there. And most people are getting it from there. There are some larger producers in Alberta as well. Eagle Lake Nurseries is a good example, but they're no longer retail. They've gone strictly commercial, so you'll find their products at places like, I think they sell a Canadian Tire and stuff like that as well. So really, with a containerized plant, it's not too important where you're going to get that. You really want to think, if you're going to put something in the ground, what you're getting, is it suited to the area, where was the seed stock coming from, or where is it being propagated from original parent plants from, because that's going to have a big impact on the health of it in the long term. But these are factors that are not relevant to containerized growing.
Okay, thanks. That was a really long answer for that, but that works. I think covered a lot of good information in that. So the next question is from Barb, and she says, hey, what do I need to prune in the spring?
Yeah, so springtime, your fruit trees, apple trees, crab apple trees. Spring is a particularly good time to prune your choke cherries and maydays. I'd like to mention it's a good time to be checking for disease and damages, and that's always something you want to look for in your fruit trees. You want to remove any signs of disease as soon as you possibly can. Other than that, we want to make sure that, again, the elms, American elms specifically, are done before the end of March. That is to prevent the spread of Dutch elm disease, as I mentioned earlier. And Dutch elm disease is actually spread by bark beetles, and those bark beetles become active as we get into April and May, and they start moving around. And they're going to be attracted to elms that have fresh cuts in them. They release the scent in the air, and that attracts the bugs. And we don't want to attract those bugs that have Dutch elm disease as near as, Saskatchewan has a pretty bad problem with it. Regina's got some serious problems with Dutch elm. And so we want to not allow those bugs, or attract those bugs, I should say, by pruning vast amounts of elms during the growing season. Other than that, there's a few trees that are really important to be done in the summertime, such as your maples and your birches. But other than that, it's kind of a mix, really. Most trees aren't too picky, and there's sort of pros and cons to everything. I'd focus on your fruit trees, though.
Okay, and Debbie said the answer really helped about the dwarf evergreens. And yeah, moving on to the next question, Jean asks, my weeping birch has lots of dead branches. Can it be saved?
Yes, I'm familiar with that birch. Unfortunately, and I know where you're at, Jean, it's a tough place for birch right now. There's a bug called the bronze birch borer, and this is a boring insect that eats the wood on the inside of the tree. It's generally going to target mature trees that are somewhere in their age of 30 to 40 years, or up to about 60. They prefer sort of a matured tree as far as a host, or where they're going to be attracted to. And that part of the city, there's lots of trees of that age, and there's lots of that bug. It's a big problem in Calgary, and I've seen similar problems in different species with some similar bugs, farther south where I'm at too. Bark beetles being a good example do a very similar kind of damage. And anytime you see that your tree suddenly got a whole bunch of dead, generally you can put your money on it's a bark beetle or a borer, one or the other, because there's very few things that are going to do that much damage to a tree. In one season, suddenly you got a huge portion of dead. That's what you're going to be looking at. And there's treatment options out there, but then that becomes sort of a preventative thing that you have to continually do. Because when it's in an area and you're battling a large population, a lot of pest pressure, as we call it, you kind of have to just keep on it and keep getting treatments done. Otherwise, you run the risk of you miss 1 year and then the bugs are back. The good news is there's some long-term treatments available for it. There's some organic-based insecticides, and they've shown to have long-term protection against boring pests, in terms of years rather than, some products might only be weeks or months.
Okay, thanks, Clay. And then we have another question. What causes the black knot on my mayday trees?
So black knot is a fungal infection, and this is a great time to be looking for it. So if you have a mayday or any variety of chokecherry, they are highly susceptible to black knot. Now, the reason this is a problem for your tree is maybe not as straightforward as most people think. Black knot is very rarely going to kill your tree. It may kill a section that it's connected to, but overall the tree, it'll keep going. The challenge comes in because chokecherries in nature aren't really trees. They're shrubs, and they tend to shoot out from the roots. And the way they deal with black knot in nature is when a stem that is growing up gets that black knot, it then just sends up a new stem from its root system somewhere else. And so that infected piece doesn't really go anywhere, and it just keeps adding more shoots and getting bigger as a result of that stress. And this is what it will do all over your lawn, is a result of having that infection, especially when you get a lot of it. The next part of the challenge with that disease is it's very virulent, so it spreads very quickly. The spores are carried on the wind. Even a light breeze is able to spread the spores around, and a small prolonged period of moisture is all it needs to incubate and allow it to start infecting a host. Now, to manage this, whenever you find black knot or any abnormal swelling in the branches, which is your first indicator, if that black fungal bloom bursts out of that, it's releasing spores. You want to try to get it out as soon as you can. And this is the best time to see it because the leaves aren't on the tree and you can kind of see what's going on through the whole thing. When you do remove the black knot, you want to make sure that you're getting it at least 12 inches back from the infection. To the nearest junction, it is important that you follow proper pruning techniques. We don't cut a branch halfway. It doesn't heal there. If you cut it halfway, it doesn't heal. You want to make sure you're finding a lateral branch coming out and cutting so that it's going to heal over at this point of junction. Trees heal where they join with other limbs. They don't heal in the middle, and you're just going to end up with prolonged problems by pruning it incorrectly.
And is it the tools that have to be sanitized when dealing with black knot?
So
or no?
That's an interesting questions. In the field of arboriculture, there's been a lot of back and forth on that. I've heard some studies out of Guelph University where they've had some inconsistent data trying to transmit that disease with pruning tools. The act of pruning, though, vibrates the branch, so and it releases spores. So it's a challenge. I mean, there's some theories. I've seen people, try bagging it before they cut it, and I've heard some people use hairspray on it. My biggest recommendation is just get it out as soon as you can, and then once you've got it out, give it a high phosphor fertilizer. That's going to help it fight off and resist fungal infection, and then just watch it, maintain it, and keep getting it out as soon as you can. If you find that your tree's getting an awful lot of it, though, usually it's just a downhill battle, and you're better to cut your losses, plant a new tree, and move on, because unfortunately, as much as the tree might not just die from it, it's going to start taking over your yard. It's the general end result you get from this kind of, infection.
And then a follow-up question to that one. How do you dispose of the black knot limbs that were removed?
So, again, there's a lot of sort of theories on what is the best thing to do. Burning things is always great. You kind of incinerate everything. If you can do that handily enough, we've got a brush pile that we do actually, burn down every once in a while. The biggest thing, if you've got the ability to put it into a container, once you've got it all taken care of, that's going to help. But to be honest, it's kind of a drop in the bucket sort of situation, because when you've got black knot, usually there's hundreds of other trees around you that have black knot too, and they're all spreading these spores in huge, vast amounts. So, you're not doing that much by collecting and trying to, manage your spore production when you're pruning and taking. It doesn't matter. There's going to be more spores. You just got to really be on it. Is the only real, feasible solution. If your tree is not too susceptible. If it's really susceptible, again, it's just not worth fighting with. It's a downhill battle. I've spent many, many years taking care of people's trees and trying to save people's trees because they really wanted, even though I told them it wasn't likely going to be a good outcome. And I've had a few that turned out all right, but usually after 5 or 10 years, they look like garbage. You've cut out so many huge pieces out of them because of the black knot. There's just nothing nice left.
So what would you plant? So if you cut down the tree, what would you plant in there instead?
Anything but a prunus. So proper cherries, sour cherries. They are slightly susceptible to black knot, although I don't generally see it here. Apricots can also get it as well, although you don't see a lot of apricots around here. I know there's a few. But yeah, I would just recommend kind of group branching out completely. Whatever you see around you, in terms of your community, if there's a lot of a certain kind of tree, the goal is to plant something completely different. The greater the diversity, or the less neighboring trees that there are like that tree, the less spread of pest and disease you're going to have. Diversity is the key to managing disease on whole. So my recommendation is just look around and plant something that's not around.
Okay, sounds good. And then, moving on, we have another question here. When do lilacs need to be pruned?
Lilac pruning. Yeah, if you want flowers, you need to prune those lilacs after they've finished flowering. Right as they're starting to do their seed pods, get them off right then. They start to produce their flower buds shortly after they produce their seed pods, and so if you prune them any time after that, you're potentially cutting off your flowers for next year. Now, if you really need to do something drastic to your lilac, it doesn't matter. Do that whenever. If you've got to reduce it by half or whatever major work you need to do, it's going to take time to get back to where it was anyway. But if you're just looking to maintain a certain size and shape, always do that right when the flowers are finished.
Okay, and another one is, when should I call an arborist?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, first off, I highly recommend everyone, take some time to look at their trees regularly. It doesn't take a lot to just look at it, take a good analytical look. What's going on with it? Do I see anything happening? And then you have a baseline. So if you look at your tree and your tree, looks all right, and then the next time you look at a tree and one of the branches is going like that, if it's a big tree, it's time to call an arborist. Something's major's changed. Trees don't change that fast, so that's a good indicator. If you find your tree, this color changes out of season or something weird's happening other than that way, that's a good indication that you've got some sort of a pest or a disease problem that might be starting, and you want to get an arborist in then too. Often problems, by the time you see them, they've been around a while when it comes to trees. They don't present when they're having that problem right away. So as soon as you see anything that's like, that's different, that doesn't look right, you're going to want to get on it and make sure that you're getting an arborist in to at least have a look and do a consultation, see what's going on, what might need to happen.
Okay, and that's all the questions I have in the queue, so maybe we'll just open it up to see if anyone else has any other questions.
Yeah, and I appreciate all the good questions, everyone. I enjoy teaching people about trees, and I spent a lot of years doing this, and this is one of my favorite parts of my previous job, working as your tree doctor in Calgary. Teaching people about their trees and how to take care of them is kind of one of my, overlying passions when it comes to arboriculture. I love climbing trees and I love doing the work, but I particularly love, making sure people know how to best care for their plants.
Okay, and then we did get one more question here from Debbie. She says, we planted an aspen columnar last summer. do we need to do anything special this year?
Can we get an answer on like what time of year it was planted?
So, Debbie, what time of year was it planted?
So, first thing to pay attention to, if you haven't put mulch on it, and I'll answer while I wait for your response, but if you haven't put mulch around it, definitely start with putting mulch around the base of the tree. Don't pile it up against the trunk, but having some mulch around the base of a newly planted tree helps insulate the root system, both from sun exposure, which allows it to retain moisture longer, but it also helps insulate it over the winter too. Just giving it a bit of a barrier from those extreme temperatures that we might end up getting. Other than that, you really want to just keep an eye on it as it's budding out to see, that it's following the other trees of the same variety that are, in the same neighborhood or around you. If it's not following that, same timing, and that may be a time to bring someone in to take a look. But other than that, a good high phosphorus fertilizer, something like a 10-52-10, or just a basic low nitrogen, high phosphorus fertilizer is going to help promote root development. And so root development is going to be the main focus of the trees after they're planted. So yeah, I'd say focus on root development, and if you planted it from a container, if the roots weren't really well pulled out, you also may want to consider just making some minor cuts along it to allow it to branch out. If they're root bound for too long, the end result can be that the tree will fall over as it gets significantly larger because its roots are kind of tangled up in the bottom. So.
Okay, she responded with, it was planted in August.
August? Yeah, so definitely water it in really well. August is a tough time for trees to be planted. Actually, it's probably the hardest time for them. If it held its leaves to the fall, then it should be in good shape. But the one thing I like to do when I'm taking a look at trees at this time, to just help assess to see where their health is I like to check to see that their buds are a good size. So.
How do I turn it off?
Oh, yeah. Hold on, I'll do it.
It's late.
There we go.
Sorry, pager test is late today. Normally it's at 7 o'clock, which is why we timed this for 7:30.
Yeah, but anyway, so, where was I? Do you remember where I was?
I don't.
Pager test just ruins everything every time.
If it's held its leaves to the fall.
Oh, yes, if it's held its leaves to the fall, check the buds to see if they're large, and then when you're checking them, I always feel them, and you want them to feel cool to the touch. If there's still good moisture in those branches and in the buds, you just kind of gently grab onto them. They're going to be quite cool, especially this time of year. If they're dead and dry, you'll know right away when you grab it. It's the difference between grabbing sort of something that's wet outside and a fence post. Your fence post really doesn't feel that cold when it's cool out, but living branches should definitely feel significantly cooler.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just wait here and see if anyone else has any more questions. And I see some new people have joined us, so hello.
Oh, hello.
If you have any questions, just stick them in the comment box there and we'll answer them best as we can.
Well, I think we'll have another one of these scheduled. Are we doing this every 2 weeks, Marika?
Yeah, I think the next one, we were thinking of doing maybe a pruning.
Yeah.
Because it's about that time.
Yeah, we're hoping we'll have some light available to do a pruning demonstration. I think the daylight savings is coming up, though, so we'll have to look at the calendar. We'll put something on Facebook, just to clarify that. But if we can get a good pruning demonstration, I've got a few small fruit trees that are up for another pruning this year. And, we can go over a few things for people.
Oh, and there is one more question. What services do you provide?
Services I provide? Consultation, first and foremost. I've specialized in plant health care, disease and pest management for trees for many, many years. I do also do pruning and some removals, although I'm kind of, basically on my own doing all this stuff, so I don't take on anything too crazy. Just, safety's sake. I'm only going to do things that I'm comfortable with doing on my own, basically. Awesome. How are we doing for time?
It is 7:56.
All right, so I think we'll start wrapping this up. And I think going forward, we'll kind of block out a half hour or so, and then, if we're having a lot of questions, we might be able to add a little bit of time, but I don't think we'll go too much longer than that. But if we don't have a lot, then we'll, probably end it early too. This was the first time trying this, so we'll see how this plays out over time. But I think I'll try to maybe work in some demonstrations on a few things as we go through this. So maybe I'll have a bit of a highlight topic to talk about. For example, I want to make sure people know to look at their elms, and if they need pruning to get that done. That was my goal for today. Next time we'll talk about maybe a little bit of small tree pruning, the basics for people. I definitely encourage that people take some sort of stake in their trees and take care of them when they're young on their own if they can. A lot of people are kind of scared to prune their small trees, but to be honest with you, when they're small, there's so much time ahead of it that you really have to mess up to do something terrible. And as long as you know the basics of proper pruning and a little bit of idea of what you're looking to do over time, which is not super complicated in concept, you're going to have some reasonable results. Now, if you're looking for something, particularly nice, or there's some really talented arborists out there that can make a tree look really good over time. I'm lucky enough that I've been called that myself, and I know a lot of other really good arborists out there that can do a really good job of getting your tree from a little tree into something that's got a really great shape. But there's a lot of things that can come up that are really easy to address just with a quick snip. Anytime you see a branch that's rubbing up against each other or crossing into it, it's not a hard decision generally. One of them's got to go, and pick the one that's going the wrong direction is usually what you do. So if you've got some basic understanding of how to use your hand tools, we'll be able to give you some tips on how to do some basic pruning and maintenance of your small trees.
Okay, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, we have time for one more.
Okay, what do you have growing behind you?
What do I have growing behind me? Oh, that's a good question.
The list is right there.
Well, I got a list. I'll read it to you. There's a lot there. Mostly tomatoes is what you'll see now. We've got quite a few varieties, but you won't see them. They're really tiny, but we've got petunias, and I've got some lobelias popping up as well. But they are so they're like the tiniest little seedlings I've ever seen. This is the first year I've grown them, so it's a new experience for me for these little guys, and it's cool. I had to actually get the microscope lens on my phone to take a picture of them. They're so
and
small.
I will be posting that because it's a really neat picture.
Yeah, especially with those cool purple lights. But yeah, sort of the list of what we got going on right now. I'll just rattle it off of what's in the trays. We've got some beefsteak tomatoes, starfire tomatoes, Hungarian hot wax peppers, early jalapeno, easy wave petunias. With that was some strawberries. We've got some California wonder peppers, sweet salsa peppers. King of the North peppers are supposed to be really good, for our climate. And I got these seeds actually, from a local source. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them. It's the first year for trying those. Fresnos, jalapenos, and we've got Scotia tomatoes, yellow wonder peppers, chocolate cherry tomatoes. If Garrett's listening, I did manage to find some grape tomatoes, and I'm starting some from the actual tomatoes because I couldn't find seeds. No one seems to have grape tomato seeds that I could easily track down anyways. But I've got some started. They've germinated, so we'll have a few of those. Subarctic plenty, green purple tomatoes, early girl tomatoes, Romas, prudent purple tomato, and then we've got some really neat hybrid trailing tomatoes for, we're going to have some hanging baskets with those trailing tomatoes as well. Yeah. And then the lobelias and chrysanthemums is in the last tray there.
And then this is just the first wave, so we're going to have, what is it, 2 more waves of plants that are started?
At least, well, it'll be 2, but might work out to 4. The last one might get split up. Just some stuff grows pretty quick, so we may split up the last one into 2 little ones. Oh, am I off camera?
Yeah. You moved, so you're off camera there.
There we go. So yeah, and then there's a whole bunch more. You know, we've just kind of broken things up. This is all the stuff we wanted to have really big, you know, come May. So we've got it started nice and early, and you know, our greenhouse should be going up here in a couple of weeks. So we're hoping to have all this out, you know, by April. And you know, with a couple months in the greenhouse, I think we're going to be looking at, you know, 2-foot plus plants for sale come spring. So.
And we should mention that this is just a scaled up version of what we normally grow for ourselves. So Clay has a lot of knowledge and a lot of success in growing many of these plants. Some of them are first for us, so we'll see how they go, but they're just slightly different varieties than what we normally grow.
Yeah, and I, you know, my tomatoes have been sort of, I've gotten out of hand on me a little bit in the last number of years. You know, I've grown so many the last few years, I've had to give some away because I've just gotten too good at it. They're just everywhere, and I love doing it, so I've had tomatoes all over the place. So now it's just sort of the natural progression of that, just taking it to the next level, making it a business.
Yeah, sharing it with our community.
Yeah, and doing what I love. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for everyone who's logged on and everyone who sent in their questions. And so we will be doing this not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. So every 2 weeks on Wednesdays until we start doing actual deliveries, and then we'll work out how that's going to look based on the deliveries that we do have.
Yeah.
So anything more?
No, I think, yeah, I've hit the points out, you know, make sure people knew about their elms, and I can't hammer that down enough, you know, and it is an actual legal ban on elms too, so, you know, once we get into April, there's fines, you know, for doing that unless it's an emergency, essentially, so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kennedy.
Yeah.